Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a preview for this week's Hero World Challenge. We've got the Big Cat Tiger Woods back teeing it up here for this week's action, and Will Zalatoris that we haven't seen for nearly a year at this point. So excited for that. We've got plenty of studs in the field, whether it's a Jordan Spieth, JT, you've got Scotty Scheffler, Hovland teeing it up. It's pretty much a major championship type of field. I know it's only 20 players, but still some DFS contests to go out there and try and take down ourselves. And on top of that, a few props that we can talk about as well. So we'll start off with a look at the golf course, make sure everyone knows what to expect from Albany this week. And then afterwards, we'll go through the DFS slate, talk about some of the important things there to keep an eye on when building your lineups. And then towards the end of the live stream, we'll hop over to Prize Picks and over there on Underdog Fantasy and bring you guys a few props you might want to get some exposure to yourself. So a lot to get into here, a week that is going to be a whole lot of fun. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. All right, we've got our projections up here, but before we go player by player, we'll touch on all 20 in the field this week. Let's talk about the golf course, right? Albany, get an idea of what these players are going to be facing. So first and foremost, this is like a desert style golf course. I'm out there in a Caribbean style environment. It's not really typical for most golf courses this part of the country. And really, if you imagined yourself out there in the Southwest United States, like in Arizona, maybe even like a Scottsdale, right? TPC Scottsdale type of environment, you could probably convince yourself that you're over in that part of the country rather than over there in the Bahamas. For a coastal golf course, it is about half a mile inland. You don't have any views of the ocean out there. There's not really many water hazards to speak of either. And really the only place you can get in trouble is if you miss the fairways, there's no rough out there, and you end up in that desert area that I was talking about before. Of course, it's much more of like a sandy duney area out there in the Bahamas, but it plays very similarly. You've got a lot of native grasses in there, a lot of bushes that'll lead to lost balls, trees, rocks, pebbles, all that sort of fun stuff. But outside of the huge misses off the tee, this is a very straightforward golf course. It reminds me a lot of El Cardinal that we had there a few weeks ago. It reminds me of Vedanta Vallarta, a little bit of Port Royal Golf Club as well. It is a lot longer than what you have at Port Royal, but because of the way that the tee shots are set up, because of the way that some of the shorter par fours play, you're gonna have a lot of wedges in hand too. So it's a perfect, I would say, fall series event, right? Wide corridors, wide fairways, and try and give these players a little bit more leeway than they'd be used to. Let's say towards some of the harder courses towards the middle of the season. But really, you're not looking at that much this week. You got all the world's best players playing, trying to use a model to identify your top plays. It can help if you need a tiebreaker, that sort of thing, but I don't think the modeling should be the end-all be-all this week. If you're going to look at anything in terms of stats, driving distance has proven to be important here, as it is nearly a 7,500-yard golf course. In terms of your approach buckets, it's pretty, I would say, balanced in terms of your distribution. So you can see here, there's not a huge difference between any one bucket compared to another. Your putting stats, we do have Bermuda grass greens, so you can always look at some of the Bermuda putting stats, but really, some Bermuda around the green stats. It's Bermuda from tip to toe out there. There are 5 par 5s on site, so maybe a little bit more important for this week than you'd see for most golf tournaments. And then I threw in some shots gained to windy conditions stuff, and then some no-cut event stuff as well. It's not really a week where you want to be using the modeling maybe as much as you would be right towards the middle of the season, which is why I didn't throw any calm courses in there. It's why I didn't get that crazy with the model this week. Just especially when half the field hasn't played during the fall swing, you're not really getting all that much utility out of using a model this week. But wanted to make sure everyone knew about the golf course. It is, of course, a course that Tiger has played 3 or 4 times in the past. We'll talk about Tiger. He's down towards the bottom of the pricing. But now let's go player by player. Right? Let's talk about some of the DFS strategy involved and more importantly, the types of players that you want to keep an eye on for this week. So up top, I think there's really a one tier with these top 2 players. You've got an elite tier with Hovland and Scotty Scheffler. Of course, Hovland is your back-to-back champion, and then Scotty Scheffler is your back-to-back runner-up finisher. So the pricing reflects that. Not really a surprise, especially considering how well Hovland has played over the last few months. And you're not going to find a hotter golfer on the entire planet, right? I mean, Hovland, whether it's been on the Euro Tour, Tour Championship, playoff swing out there for the PGA Tour, the guy was just winning pretty much every single week, right? And if he wasn't winning, he was in contention literally every single week. So pretty much any metric you look at, whether it's recent form, total model ranking, the only thing he doesn't rank number 1 in the field in would be the long-term course fit, where Scotty Scheffler slightly edges a Victor Hovland, but considering that Hovland is your back-to-back champion here, maybe he's truly probably the best course fit out there. So if you're going to play a Hovland or a Scotty, I'm perfectly fine with either. Just know that the ownership is going to be through the roof, right? You've got a lot of cheap options this week. I mean, guys like Jordan Spieth, right, are $7,400. I mean, heck, Will Zalatoris is $6,600 in this field. So people have no problems getting to a Scotty or a Victor Hovland. The one thing I'd say is I think some people might think it's a little bit unique to take both in the same lineup. It is going to be a lot more prominent on this sort of week than any other week on tour, right? I mean, first off, there's only 20 players to choose from, but when you have all these cheap options that are normally like 9, sometimes 10K golfers, like Keegan Bradley in a shitty field is a 10K golfer, right? You're getting it for $6,800 this week. People aren't going to have any problem getting down there. I mean, Lucas Glover, $6,000. Right? He's my number 3 course fit in the entire field, right? When you have those sort of players to choose from down low, this double buy-up strategy that might actually be unique for a regular golf tournament is not going to be this week. So just know that if you're taking one or even both of these players up top, that you are getting a whole lot of ownership attached to them, but you are going to have the salary to spend. And then towards the end, when we start talking about some of the lower tier options, you could leave salary on the table to get different. There are a few players down low that aren't garnering a whole lot of ownership. There are ways to differentiate yourself. So just because they're getting all this ownership, don't think that means that you have to go out there and fade them by any means. Just know that that has consequences on the rest of your lineup, right? Both from the salary and then, of course, from the lineup construction perspective, where you need to be trying to differentiate after taking that sort of player. The next tier down, you've got this Homa Morikawa tier, right? We'll say that's its own tier, right? Tier with those two players, because really the fall off down there to Fitzpatrick and Cam Young is massive, right? So you've got Max Homa, Colin Morikawa. Morikawa has great course history here, has also started to play a lot better over this fall swing, including a win at the Zozo where he ran away with it. And then Max Homa has been playing a lot better himself and is also coming in off a win, right? Won the Nedbank Challenge over there on the DP World Tour. So you've got 2 winners, right, that are a little bit pricey here, but they're also getting a lot of ownership, right? 38% on a Homa, a 37% projected ownership number on a Colin Morikawa. So while some people may see these as slight ownership pivots, what is it, a 5% ownership difference between Scheffler and Homa, and what, a 10% ownership difference between a Hovland and a Colin Morikawa? You're getting slight differentiation, but it's not really making all that much a difference, right? It's still a third of the lineups, or actually a little bit over a third of the lineups, right, have both of these players. That's why I don't think it's that big a deal to take a Hovland or a Scheffler up top, right? These guys in the next tier down are pretty much just as popular. And to go with the salary thing once again, right? Even if you start with like one of the top guys and then take one of these guys down here, right? They're all the same. They're all within the same ownership number. They're all there in the 10K plus range. You're gonna have plenty of salary to work with. Really, just pick your guys up top. Right, if you're going to have chalky pieces that you like this week, I am playing plenty of the chalk up there for full disclosure. Just make sure you pick your guys and then differentiate down low or with lineup construction, which we'll talk about a little bit later. A few different ways that you can go out there and change up your lineup construction. So outside of the chalk up top, let's start going down the next tier here, which would be like a Fitzpatrick, Cam Young tier. You could probably throw in like a JT Ricky into that tier as well. These 4 guys have been playing okay, right? Especially JT's been up on the up and coming for the next, last 3 to 4 months at this point. He's also the most popular out of the bunch here. Cam Young's played during the fall. He's been okay, right? Really hasn't done anything special in the fall. Matt Fitzpatrick's played okay over there on the DP World Tour. No wins or anything like that, but has gone out there, gone into contention a few times. And then Ricky Fowler has won this event in the past, but is not really playing the best. So I would say the talent gap difference between these 4 than the top 4 players is pretty significant, right? I would say the talent gap difference from, these top 2 to the next 2 is significant, but it's not that massive. This talent gap difference, right, from that second tier to the third tier down here is like double the difference to the first tier. So if you're going to spend up and take these chalkier options, that's why they're getting all that ownership. I would almost rather have these guys up top, like a Hovland and a Scheffler at like 45%, then take a 30% owned Cam Young, right? He's still expensive. He's still $8,700. And I know they are technically lower owned, right? But he's 5% lower owned than Morikawa. He's coming in off a win, and Cam Young in shitty fields has been finishing in 30th, right? Matt Fitzpatrick, not even winning over there on the DP World Tour. You have guys that are coming off wins over there on the DP World Tour and a whole lot less starts, right? You got a win in the PGA Tour, right? For a Colin Morikawa over there, this is where the pricing this week and the ownership, I think, is a little bit out of whack. These chalky players, I would argue, aren't chalky enough compared to some of the guys down here in the 8 and 9K range. So that's a tier of its own. I like Justin Thomas. He likes Bermuda grass. He's playing with Tiger Woods, which might be a little bit of a distraction over the first 2 days, but it's a golf course that fits his game, and he's trending in the right direction. So I hate taking all the chalky guys up top, but it's the kind of week for it, right? There's only 20 players. You're going to have a hard time getting leverage to begin with. It's much more important how you're putting your lineup together, which again, we'll talk about here towards the bottom of the pricing. Actually, more towards the middle, and you'll see why here in a second. So we've got Ricky Fowler there. This next tier would be like a Finau, Spieth, Clark, and Burns. I would say just maybe another step down in terms of your talent level. Spieth we haven't seen since the Ryder Cup. Tony Finau we've hardly seen at all. Has not played well when he's teed it up anyways. Wyndham Clark we haven't seen very much. And then Sam Burns, same thing, right? These sort of players haven't been very active during the fall swing. You throw Justin Rose into that same argument. They're all high tier players, all very quality players out there. And this is where the mid-tier argument comes in. So a lot of the people this week, right, are going to be like, okay, what pieces of chalk am I going to eat up top? What if the answer is none of them? What if the answer is that you just take all of these guys down here in the 7K range that are lower owned, right? Down here, you've got like a 26% Spieth. Like, that's a pretty decent ownership number. 27% of Wyndham Clark is one of the lower owned players on the entire slate. And really, 20%, right? A 26 versus a 46 matters, right? When it's a 20% difference, that's significant, right? When we're talking about a 5% difference between a Scheffler and a Homa, that's trivial. That doesn't really mean all that much. The argument I have for this week, and how I'm going to build a few of my lineups, at least a few of my single entries this week, is leaving a lot of salary on the table and just building with the bottom of the board. Throwing in a Jordan Spieth, you guys know I'm playing this week, right? I always play Jordan Spieth. That shouldn't be a surprise. Maybe it's my first minute as a Justin Thomas, hoping he wins this golf tournament. If you have anyone but these top 4 players go out there and win this golf tournament, this could be easily the GPP lineup that you have to have, right? And I think in single entries where you don't have to have the absolute nuts, I like this strategy even more, right? Going out there, trying to find some of these middle tier options, because you can take 6 players in your lineup that you feel really good about by doing this strategy. You can also get a lineup construction that's likely to be unique because you can leave $1,000, sometimes even $2,000 worth of salary on the table, and you're still taking quality players, right? So let's see, a Jordan Spieth, you could throw into a lineup. You could throw like a Sam Burns into a lineup. I mean, really, this whole range, right? I'm not playing every single player down here in the 8, 7, and 6K range, but there are plenty to choose from. And just to give you a few of my favorites, right? Jordan Spieth fits the golf course. You know I'm playing him. It's not just that he's my favorite player that I'm using him this week. He's really good around the green. He's solid on Bermuda grass. Has been dealing with a little bit of a wrist injury, but that is hopefully going to keep the ownership lower, right? It's why he's one of the lower owned players in this entire range. So I think he's intriguing, right? If you think the injury doesn't hold him back, could easily go out there and nuke the slate. I know Tony Finau hasn't been playing all that well when we've seen him, but we haven't seen him much of late, right? Which is maybe a really good thing. He's the type of player that can snap out of it quickly. You see him get very streaky out there, and I know he hasn't been playing that much. He's, actually said in a few interviews that he's taken some time away from the game. Maybe that helps him reset, right? Go out there, start firing like he was towards the beginning of last year, where he won, I think it was 3 times in a few months, right? He went out there, was looking like an absolute world beater. I think a lot of people forget that about Tony Finau. So it's these sort of players. A Wyndham Clark, another guy that really fits the golf course, right? If you're looking for around the green on Bermuda, distance off the tee, and I was looking at Corrales as a potential comp course. It's a long resort style golf course, very similar off the tee. It's in the Dominican Republic as opposed to the Bahamas. But very similar from like the weather standpoint, length, greens, all of that are very similar. It's past pollen grass, so the agronomy is a little bit different. But yeah, Wyndham Clark won that event, has played well pretty much every time he's teed it up over that way. Probably a guy to keep an eye on there too. You've got Justin Rose, Sam Burns, another bomber off the tee that's really good on Bermuda. So you probably want to consider Sam Burns at this type of golf tournament. And none of these guys have great track records, right? If we go to the event history, there's a reason why they're a little bit cheaper. They're not as good players as the top end range. But if there's a week to just go out there, fade the top end guys, I think it's this week, right? And I know a lot of people will point to the back-to-back wins and the back-to-back second place finishes and be like, oh, you have to play those top 2? I guess we'll see, right? Golf's a volatile sport. Crazy shit happens, right? Guys that have some of the best track records at courses the entire year go out there and miss cuts. Now, this week, right? No cut, right? So these guys are going to be playing all 4 rounds. If they don't win the golf tournament, right? They're $10,000 golfers. you probably don't have to have him this week, right? You probably do have to have the guy that wins if he's down here in the 6 or 7K range. So that's the way that I'm going to handle my large field GPPs, even single entries, right? I think it's just a good way to get different to the field, to go out there and get that leverage, because literally everybody, and when I say literally everybody, 85% of lineups are going to have at least a Hovland or a Scheffler. And I'd say probably like 10% are going to have both of them in the same lineup by just kind of like fading them, right? Kind of throwing them to the side. That could be all the leverage that you have to have this week. So in my large field pool, just for full disclosure, I am playing one of those top 2 players, but there's a huge argument to be made that that's just a quick way to get different right on there. A few other things to note about this week is you're going to see a lot of duplicates, right? So if you're building 150 lineups, if you're using a lineup optimizer this week, you absolutely have to be going in there and setting roles, unless you're okay with duplicating and, ruining your EV essentially. With only 20 players to choose from, there are so many less combinations that you can put together. And because of that, in large field GPPs, like a 20, 30,000 entry type of contest, this is a week that you could really kill your EV. So if you're somebody that's building 150 lineups, I'm not even going to build a set of 150 this week. It's probably going to be like 50 lineups. I'm doing them all by hand. I want to make sure that every lineup has a good chance at being unique, yet still having a decent projection out there. So I'm not just entering lineups that I'm burning money on fire with, but at the same time, duplicating yourself is going to be a real problem here, right? PGA DFS, it's not usually the biggest problem for us because there are like 156 players to choose from. But with only 20, right, that's 20 choose 6. That's not really, put it this way, right? Go into calculator, do 20 choose 6 and compare it to 156 choose 6. You'll see what I'm talking about out there. So it's a week to get different. It's a week to play that game theory edge. And that's certainly what I'll be doing in my exposure. All right, and now for some prop exposure. So first off, over here on Underdog, we're going to be taking an under on Justin Thomas strokes, and then a little bit of a rivals matchup, because we don't have birdies or better to work with. We will have them for prize picks, which we'll get to here in just a minute or two. But this under in JT, I like at 69.5, as first off, he fits the golf course quite well. It's coming in with some of the best form of the entire field. And on top of that, the weather conditions for tomorrow look pretty ideal. They're in the 10 to 12 mile an hour range in terms of your sustained winds, which is pretty typical for what you get out there at the Bahamas. You're not dealing with a still day, right, where it's like a 3 to 6 mile an hour sustained wind, but you're not getting blown off the golf course. So I like that for JT. He's the type of player that's extremely skilled around the green, particularly on Bermuda grass, which is the type of grass that we have this week. So going off with Tiger, I know there's going to be a lot of attention on JT, probably a lot of pressure on Tiger to go out there and play well. Hopefully JT can go out there and steal the show a little bit. So has to shoot 3 under par to cover here. It is a par 72 setup. In the past, you've seen scoring averages of 2.5 under par. With the winds, in the average range, I'd say for the golf course, you're probably going to see a 1.5 to 2 under par scoring average. So for JT to go out there, gain a stroke, maybe a stroke and a half to the field is very realistic, especially considering the type of form that he's coming into the event with. So that's the first prop. The second prop is this rivals matchup. So it's Willie Z versus Jordan Spieth, who first off, if you're just looking at the projections on Underdog, which I don't really agree with all of them, just for full transparency, but Jordan Spieth is at 69 strokes, and then you got Will Zalatoris, who I know they have at 69.5. Where is he at? I know he's on here somewhere, Willie Z. I'm sure I just went over. Either way, he's at 69.5 strokes. Yeah, there he is right there, right? On Prize Picks, he's at 70 strokes. They opened Jordan Spieth at 69 strokes. If you look at sports books like FanDuel, Caesars that have odds up for the strokes in round one, Jordan Spieth is at 69.5 and juiced pretty decently under. And then guys like Will Zalatoris, they've got it 70.5 strokes. So they've got an entire stroke discrepancy between the two there. Jordan Spieth, of course, not coming in off an 8-month rest like somebody like Will Zalatoris is. He dealt with the back injury, has been rehabbing for literally the last year out there on the PGA Tour. So Zalatoris, especially early in the week, is somebody that I think is going to be a little bit rusty. Now, I think by the time we get to Saturday, Sunday, he's going to look a lot better, a lot more fluid than what we see there on Thursday and Friday. But at least for round one, right, I'd rather have Jordan Spieth, who's at least been practicing nonstop, playing nonstop for the last 7-8 months. And he is dealing with an injury to his wrist himself, right? I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but it hasn't hampered his practice, right? He's gone out there, been pretty much a full go for the last 4 or 5 months anyways, despite not playing on the PGA Tour. So that's the side I'm taking for round one, right? The healthier player, the player with the better projection on the sports books. And I think for round round one specifically, Zalatoris is probably somebody that you can fade. So that's a slip I went with over there on Underdog. Now let's talk a little bit over there on Prize Picks. All right, over here on Prize Picks, we took the same JT prop and paired him up with an over on Max Homa. So rather than just having strokes, Prize Picks does have a birdie or better board up, and they have a lot of guys at 5 birdies. So some of the lower tier guys at like 4.5. You got a lot of the mid tier guys at 5, and then Hovland, Scheffler up there at 5.5. The birdie or better average at this event hovers between the 4.5 to 5.5 mark. When it gets easy and you see like a 2.5 under par scoring average, you'll see 5.5 birdies made per round. When it gets a little bit more difficult, when it maybe plays only a little bit under par, is when you see like a 4.5 under par average, or say 4.5 birdie or better average out there for the harder rounds. In general, I'm expecting around 5 birdies made per round out there. With the weather conditions for round one, maybe it's closer to like 4.85 or 4.9 birdies or better per round. So for somebody like Max Homa, who is the number 3 player in the field when it comes to birdie or better percentage, only behind a Hovland and a Scheffler, right? You have to think that he's going to project much better than the field average, right? And if the field average has a chance to be 5 birdies or better, then Max Homa should not be at 5 birdies, right? As a top 3 birdie percentage guy. So we took the JT prop, matched him up there with Max Homa, and got another 3x payout. So a few props that I'm taking, of course, guys, for my entire player pool, all the different slips that I'm entering over here for Prize Picks and Underdog. Make sure to check out my Patreon page. On there is where you're going to get all the different exposure that I'm getting to. And as we see the scoring conditions tomorrow morning, there's a good chance I enter some of these birdie or better props, right? There's 5 par 5s out there. If they tend to be set up easy, if maybe the wins aren't as high as what we're expecting, then there's going to be a lot of value on taking these overs. So this is something that you'll want to keep an eye on, right? If you're betting yourself, right? Look at some of the early scoring and maybe adjust for some of the later tee times. But if you're on the Patreon, probably something to keep an eye on as well, because I will almost certainly be entering props tomorrow morning if the course plays as easy as what I'm expecting. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Hero World Challenge preview. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for this week and ready to go out there and have yourself a week for GPPs and props. Appreciate all the support here on the channel. Go ahead, smash that like button on the way out of here, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll be doing videos for all the golf tournaments for next year. Next week, it's a Great Thorn Invitational, so probably no content there. But for next season, starting with the Century Tournament of Champions, gonna have you guys covered for every single event of 2024. So let's make this last week count. It's the last real event here of 2023, and go out there and end this year with a bang. So best of luck out there, like I was saying before, whether you're in those GPPs or with those prop slips, and let's go out there and have ourselves a weekend.